Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are embarking on a true detective-style investigation into what is arguably the ultimate, most profound mystery in all of science and philosophy: human consciousness. Seriously, grab your mental magnifying glass. We're going to explore how a groundbreaking framework called the neuroscience theory of consciousness, or NTC for short, offers a completely new way to solve a puzzle that has left the world's greatest thinkers completely stumped for centuries. It's a wildly fascinating journey, and by the end of this, you might just look at your own mind in a totally different way.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Deep Mystery of Consciousness and David Chalmers' Bombshell.
So, to understand the solution, we first need to understand the crime scene. Back in 1995, philosopher David Chalmers dropped an absolute bombshell on the scientific community by defining what he called the hard problem of consciousness. To really drive this home, Chalmers gave us our first spooky clue for this investigation, a brilliant thought experiment known as the philosophical zombie. Now, I want you to imagine a person standing right in front of you. This person is biologically and behaviorally completely identical to you. If a baseball flies at their head, they duck. If you tell a joke, they laugh. But here's the catch. There is absolutely no inner light inside them. None. They have zero subjective experience. They are completely, totally dark on the inside. They don't actually feel the warmth of a smile or the panic of a flying object. Their biological machine just processes the inputs and reacts.
And that brings us to the core mystery of our entire investigation today. If a physical brain can theoretically function entirely in the dark, processing information and keeping a body alive just like that philosophical zombie, then why do we actually feel anything at all? Why is the biological processing of a sunset accompanied by the breathtaking feeling of seeing a sunset? Why isn't it all just silent, dark data processing?
Which brings us to Section 2, Easy versus Hard Problems. Let's categorize our clues.
Every good detective knows that to solve a massive mystery, you first have to separate the things you can practically figure out from the things that completely defy explanation. Chalmers did exactly this by separating the mysteries of the mind into easy problems and the hard problem. Now, when we say easy problems, we absolutely do not mean they're simple to solve. They are incredibly complex. We're talking about things like memory, attention span, and how our brain processes information so we can report on it. But they're categorized as easy because science can eventually solve them by mapping out neural mechanisms and brain circuits. It's a functional mechanical puzzle. The hard problem, however, is entirely different. How do physical mechanics create the real, agonizing sting of a paper cut? How do neurons firing create the vibrant internal experience of seeing the color red? This creates what scientists call the explanatory gap, a massive, seemingly uncrossable roadblock between physical brain mechanics and internal human feelings.
Moving on to Section 3, NTC, the paradigm shift. Let's look at how we bypass this roadblock.
For a really long time, that explanatory gap seemed totally impassable. But, science never stops moving. And that brings us to a revolutionary new lens that demands a specific type of shift, an epistemic shift. Traditionally, philosophy treated consciousness as an ontological problem, meaning people thought the physical brain and the conscious mind were two entirely different kinds of reality, literally two different substances in the universe. NTC throws that right out the window. Now, what's really interesting about this is that NTC stops treating the brain and consciousness as two separate physical things. Instead, it says the problem is epistemic, meaning it's merely an issue with how we access and understand the information.
The traditional view treats the brain kind of like a factory machine, assuming consciousness is some magical extra product being pumped out, like smoke coming from a fire. But NTC completely changes the game. We aren't looking for a magical extra product at all. There is only one thing happening: the biological fire itself. The difference is simply whether you're looking at that exact same biological fire from the outside, as a scientist observing a brain, or from the inside, as the person actually experiencing it.
So, let's get into Section 4, the two main pillars of logic. These are our breakthrough clues.
To really cement this paradigm shift, NTC is supported by two massive pillars of scientific logic that firmly anchor this theory in reality. The first is the measurement principle. In science, if you measure the exact same object with two different tools, it's going to look completely different. An EEG looks at a brain and shows us a readout of squiggly electrical waves. An fMRI looks at that exact same brain and shows us a colorful map of blood flow and oxygen. They look entirely different, but it's the exact same brain. NTC argues that subjective experience is just another measurement. It's the brain's own internal instrument, feeling that exact same biological activity. You have external tools like the EEG, and you have the internal tool, which is your conscious experience.
Let's see how this builds into our second breakthrough clue, the experiential access principle. This principle points out a brilliant paradox. If you try to say science is purely objective and completely separate from subjective experience, you run straight into a brick wall. Why? Because absolutely all scientific data is ultimately filtered through personal experience. When a scientist looks at data in a lab, that visual data creates a subjective experience in their eyes. When they form a brilliant conclusion, that conclusion forms as an experience in their brain. We can literally never step outside of experience to view the universe. Experience is our only window in.
So the crucial point here is that separating consciousness from biology is a massive logical fallacy, what philosophers call a category error. It's actually wonderfully absurd when you think about it. It's like looking at a black and white printout of an EEG brainwave and angrily complaining, hey, I don't see the vibrant feeling of the color red anywhere on this paper. Well, of course you don't. The graph is just an external third-person description. The feeling of redness is what that exact same biological process feels like from the inside. You just can't expect the external description to possess the qualities of the internal state.
And here we are, Section 5, the solution, the brain's biological integration. We've reached the climax of our investigation.
We have finally made it. We've thrown out the old assumptions, organized our clues, and now NTC provides its concrete solution. Consciousness, according to NTC, is not magic. It doesn't float in from another dimension. It is the intrinsic property of global integration. When billions of tiny separate parts of your brain sync up perfectly and communicate in a globally integrated way, that incredible symphony of biological motion intrinsically is consciousness. This perfectly highlights biological dependence. Consciousness desperately needs this biological motion to exist at all. And the ultimate proof? Broken sync. When we introduce anesthesia, it disrupts this global integration. The brain parts stop talking to each other perfectly. And the very moment that biological sync breaks, the first-person route shuts off entirely and your inner experience simply vanishes.
By viewing the problem through this lens, NTC does something truly remarkable. It takes Chalmers' impossible hard problem and transforms it into a highly testable, scientific inquiry. We no longer have to ask, how does physical matter magically create an invisible ghost called the mind? Instead, we can now ask a beautifully reframed question. How is one unified biological process available simultaneously as third-person observation and first-person experience? We've completely moved from asking for magic to asking about biological mechanics and perspectives.
Wrapping up with Section 6, conclusion and future challenges. Because every good detective knows there are always threads still untied.
Look, even when you establish a brilliant new framework, science is an ongoing process. NTC is revolutionary, for sure, but it still has its challenges. There are a few key limitations scientists are actively hunting down today. First is independent measurement. Right now, to know if someone is conscious, we mostly just have to rely on them telling us. We need stronger ways to measure this biological integration independently. Second is psychophysical harmony, a fascinating concept highlighted in recent 2024 research by Cutter and Saad. They point out the ongoing mystery of exactly how and why our biology perfectly aligns with our specific mental states to keep us surviving and thriving in